Both submitted some great questions beforehand. We also got through a couple of those. So without further ado, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, thank you so much, Addie, and thanks to The Verge and Vox Media for holding this incredibly important event. And yes, it's a few hours early, but I promise it's the same day. And, we've got things like Merrick Garland's confirmation, things I can't miss, but I wanted to make sure I didn't miss this. The important 25th anniversary of the passage of the law we all now know as Section 230, this idea that we must keep improving and progressing in technology every single day. And we want so much of it to happen in America. But at the same time, we know there's problems we have to fix. So first, what we're proud of. We're proud of the success we've had and all the people that work in this area, but on our success. We have evolved, we rejuvenate. And one of the ways we do that is by figuring out what's working, what isn't working, and how we fix it. What's working? Well, the tech companies have created powerful digital tools that have transformed our daily lives. Things we take for granted today would have seemed extraordinary 25 years ago. I connect with my daughter, who was born 26 years ago, now lives in New York City, like she's next door. Okay, maybe she really wishes I wasn't next door. But my favorite new method I've used is when I text her, maybe she won't call me. I'll write, call me, because I like to talk on the phone. She may not respond right away, but if I write, call me, the doors on the airplane are closing in 3 minutes, she knows that that conversation will only last 3 minutes. Not possible without texting. We now have people in underserved medical areas that can consult with top medical experts via the internet. X-rays getting transmitted in a nanosecond. With the pandemic, we know the powerful force of technology, that there are kids literally learning to read right now on the internet, right as we speak. First graders learning to use the mute button, something I wish all the senators did. And yes, you can order almost anything online, as I've learned, like me. I ordered some potatoes. This is my fault, not the online company. This is what I received, 3 potatoes of this size. These kinds of things have happened to me often. I take the blame. We know that the virtues of technology have helped us very much get through this pandemic. But at the same time, there's so much we need to fix. We've seen unprecedented power in the hands of just a few of the companies. All of this in the shadow of one of the most challenging periods in our nation's history. More than 500,000 Americans have lost their lives to coronavirus this past year, and millions more are suffering from the economic destruction of the pandemic here and across the globe. Yet, we still can't control misinformation on the internet. Just a week ago, I was at a local cafe in Minneapolis picking up some takeout food for my husband and our family. And I went in there, and there was 3 young people. They were excited. They didn't have the vaccine yet, but they'd signed up for it for in the future. And one of them said their mother-in-law had called them and said, I could get the vaccine this week, but I don't think I'm going to, because I read online that when you get the vaccine, there's a microchip in it and it tracks you. People are saying this kind of stuff. So again, what can we do to fix it? We also know the horror of how extremist groups have used these platforms to organize and expand their influence. This came to a head on January 6th, when insurrectionists staged an assault on our very temple of democracy, the U.S. Capitol. I know, I was there. A few weeks later, on the very same platform, with the bases of columns still covered in spray paint, I got to speak at the inauguration for President Biden and Vice President Harris. And as I said that beautiful sunny morning, this is the day our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does. Goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is truly the moment where we move forward as a country, taking on, yes, the issues of our time, which include our democracy, which include climate change and immigration reform, economic fairness, getting through this pandemic, criminal justice reform, and yes, tech reform. How we as a country assert our own digital sovereignty and shape the technology landscape, we must do it. And we must get to a place where these platforms are tools of good and not tools of destruction. We need to be asking more from big tech companies, not less. We have seen that how they operate has a real life effect on the safety and civil rights for all of us, as well as on our democracy. Holding them accountable for problems that can lead to real world harm is critical to our success. And there's a lot of ways we can do this. I'll mention a little bit about the bill that Senator Warner, Hirono, and Kane and I put forth before discussing some of the larger reforms we also need in this space. The Safe Tech Act would require social media companies to be held accountable for enabling cyber stalking and civil rights violations, targeted harassment, and discrimination on their platforms. People spend many hours online every day, and we have to find a way to ensure that the fundamental laws governing our society, like civil rights protections, guarding against discrimination, are enforced everywhere, including online. At the same time, we must allow for freedom of speech and maintain and foster innovation. Hence the title of your great program today, about how we do this without breaking the internet. I would argue we're not going to break the internet with some reforms that literally follow the evolution we've seen with the internet. Our laws shouldn't remain stagnant as they were 25 years ago. It doesn't mean we get rid of them. It means we change them. Our laws need to be as sophisticated as the techniques used by people who are messing around with us. But if we are really ready to stop kicking the can down the road, we need to address a larger set of problems caused by unchecked power of monopolies, and that includes big tech companies. The incredible growth with big tech has come with an enormous societal price tag, consolidation of unprecedented power within a handful of companies, power over our personal data, power over what ads we see and what news we watch, and monopoly power in key digital markets like Google's dominance of the search engine marketplace, where they account for about 90% of the market. Do we want better safeguards on tech platforms? Yes. Increased transparency? Yes. Non-discrimination rules? Yes. And I would say much of this we can do with rules of the road that we put in place through legislation, which until now in this year wasn't even seriously being considered in this country. That's a piece of it. But the other piece of it is unleashing competition. And if certain companies keep buying out smaller competitors that could get those bells and whistles to develop privacy provisions and things that could really help us, and customers gravitate to those platforms because they're doing something about misinformation, we're never going to know this if we allow only one company to dominate a market. Comprehensive approach to big tech means dealing with, as I mentioned, privacy and transparency, discrimination, and antitrust reform. On privacy, check out the bill that Ranking Member Cantwell and Senator Schatz and Markey and I introduced last Congress, Consumer Online Privacy Rights Act, that establishes digital rules of the road that all companies must follow, including the right to opt in for highly sensitive data. The Protecting Personal Health Data Act, something I did with Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski about health technologies, Fitbit and the like. Making sure that that data belongs to the consumers. Senators Graham and Warren, that's the bill we have together when it comes to Senators Graham and Warner and I lead the Honest Ads Act, which is about political advertising and some limits on that. And finally, a bill called the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, which allows content providers to negotiate with publishers. That's a bill I have with Senator Kennedy, also David Cicilline is leading it in the House. That's worth looking at because, as we know from what just happened in Australia, there are certain tech companies that literally have the power to do what they want and say, okay, we're going to leave unless you get rid of any requirements on us that require us to negotiate. Australia pushed on that, and now there's negotiation going on. We need to do the same thing in the US. But if we want to confront any of these problems, we need to take on this issue of monopolies. Just saying trust us hasn't worked. Companies are still acting aggressively in the marketplace, imposing their will on weaker competition, sucking up as much consumer data as they can. They're still acquiring companies to add up into their corporate empires. At the root of this problem lies the ability of a few companies to act as gatekeepers. And as we see, when they dominate markets, exclude rivals, and buy out their competitors, we've got a problem. In the emailed words of Mark Zuckerberg, these businesses are nascent. But the network's established, the brand's already meaningful, and if they grow to a large scale, they could be very disruptive to us. They could be very disruptive to us. I always thought the tech industry was about disruption. It's about disrupting the status quo and bringing in new good ideas that basically blow up the marketplace in a positive way. We can't have monopolies stopping disruption. So in a way, the work I am doing is simply a reply to that email. So, well, how do we look at this? Well, let's look at it just going back to the foundings of this country. So many of our ancestors that came here fled England because they wanted religious freedom, political freedom, but also economic freedom from overbearing monopolies. It was the colonists that were drawn here in search of this freedom who dumped all that tea into the Boston Harbor on the night of December 16, 1773. Yeah, it was about taxation without representation, but it was also about not having to buy their tea from a bloated British monopoly like the East India Tea Company. Then you fast forward across the landscape of our country, you see the farmers and the union organizing going on in response to the railroad industry, the rise of Standard Oil. And you see a national major political movement growing up on taking on the trust, the antitrust movement. I'd rather call it competition policy. Woodrow Wilson had a campaign song about it. Teddy Roosevelt rode his anti-monopoly horse into the White House. And it just kept going to the breakup of AT&T. But since then, it's been pretty dormant, in part because of conservative judges. You want a strong and vibrant competitive business community. You want more innovation and choices for consumers. You want more startups, including in tech. You want more Black and brown-owned businesses. Well, then we need to foster competition. It's competition between companies that gives consumers lower prices and forces manufacturers to constantly innovate to improve their products. Competitive markets force companies to pay workers fair wages and improve working conditions. You look at how we have rejuvenated capitalism in the past. Microsoft, Apple, so many companies, when you go back to their roots, got into it because there was some kind of a pause due to antitrust enforcement, because people said, hey, IBM, you can't dominate this entire market, or hey, AT&T, you can't do that. Right now, with the exception of the work that's been gone on in the last year with those suits that were finally brought against Google and Facebook, we haven't seen that kind of rejuvenation in the capitalist system. If we're serious about addressing monopolization, yes, we have to look up at the breakup remedy. Now, that doesn't mean the companies go away. It simply means that acquisitions like WhatsApp and Instagram should not have been allowed to go through in the first place. You look back at them, you figure out, how does this industry look at as a whole? I know this from my work way back. I was in the private sector for over 14 years. I was the main lawyer for MCI in the state of Minnesota, working at a private firm. And I got to see what that was all about. At the time I was doing it, they were taking on the local monopoly carriers. But before that, they took on AT&T, broke up the Ma Bell and monopoly, lowering long distance rates, revolutionizing the telecom industry. Many, including a former AT&T president, have said that AT&T's famous breakup made the company stronger. So it's not a radical idea. It's simply part of competition. It's what Adam Smith warned about at the very beginning, when he said, yes, he was all for capitalism, but we had to watch out for the overgrown army of monopolies. And we need to do it again. My bill, what would it do? More enforcement resources for the agencies. And I have that bill with Chuck Grassley, and he is the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee now. And he understands that we can't fight Google and Facebook and trillion-dollar companies with duct tape and Band-Aids. These agencies, FTC, DOJ, antitrust, are simply a shadow of what they used to be, even during the Reagan administration. Second, merger enforcement. Looking at these mega mergers, over $5 billion mergers, and saying, okay, the companies have to show that this doesn't hurt competition, not the government. Or when they are a huge monopoly, over 50%, and they are buying these nascent competitors in their own line of business, those have to be looked at more carefully. Exclusionary conduct has to be looked at more carefully. If that had been done for years, we would have been in a better place. collecting data on industry consolidation across the board, not just tech, everything from cat food to caskets. One of my favorite TV segments on this, not that there's a lot about antitrust, but there was one that John Oliver did where he went through all the consolidation in online travel and tech and the like. And at the very end, he said, if this is enough to make you want to die, good luck, because there are only 3 companies that now make caskets. Guess what? One of them bought another one, so there are now only 2. It is time to rejuvenate our antitrust laws. It's going to make for a stronger tech sector as we see more and more startups and small companies are able to come up and grow bigger. This isn't an anti-tech concept. It is pro-tech. It is about how we can make this work for everyone, our own digital sovereignty. And it is how we fix it in a way that we don't break the internet. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was fantastic. And we're absolutely honored to have you here. So, like I said, we got some audience questions, and I wanted to jump in with a question from Anthony, who says that Congress often gives off the impression that they don't understand complex tech problems. How can Congress do a better job of showing that they do understand this complexity and providing confidence that the eventual solution will take into account those complexities?
All right, I think what he's referring to are those great moments in the congressional hearings when maybe people asked some silly questions and said things in ways that, sorry, I have to have some water. And said things in ways that kind of show their ignorance. Yeah, that happens. But it doesn't mean that you just make fun of everyone in Congress and say, oh, they can't do anything, they don't understand it. I would say that Cicilline's tech hearings last year showed that there were a lot of people that understood it. And there are a lot of people in the Senate that understand this. And so it actually sort of bugs me. I agree that it is a complex subject, but as a democracy, we can't just say, oh, we don't have, we've got some old guys or something, so we're not going to do anything about it. That makes no sense to me. Instead, we have to get staff hired that understand it. We have to work with everyone we can and all the stakeholders to get ideas. I think I did that in the antitrust area. It's been over a series of years with hearings and educating everyone, including some really smart people that are on my antitrust subcommittee, like Cory Booker, like Dick Blumenthal. I've got Mark Warner on this bill now on the antitrust. Over in the House, Cicilline has done a lot in terms of developing the whole concept of the gatekeepers and is working on legislation as well. So I think the question is good, but what I hate is we are up against these trillion-dollar mammoths, okay? And we may have a small but mighty staff that is willing to do this. So I think when people watch these hearings, be ready. People are going to say dumb stuff. That's true. But we've got to go from throwing popcorn at the screen at CEOs to actually developing change. And so more than anything, we need your help instead of having people scoff at the members. It's easy to do.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a second question that's a little bit more policy focused, which is from Justin, that he says, you don't want to limit people's ability to express themselves, but you can't let lies and misinformation ruin whole countries. So how and when can we draw that line? And how can a company be expected to police itself while still trying to make money?
Okay, well, that's what they've been trying to do, right? They've said, oh, we can police ourselves. And I keep saying, you're the biggest companies in the world. You should be able to do it by hiring enough people to say something near and dear to my heart, doing something about these political ads, instead of having, as in the past, Russia buy them with rubles. And so that just hasn't worked to do that. So what that means to me is that you have to have some rules in place. And I've laid these out. I think they're sensible. Let's start with probably the one that's pretty obvious, the privacy regulations about opting in and opting out on data, about notice of breach, those things. What's happened there is the tech companies and other companies actually opposed federal privacy rules. Then the states got in the act, they have jurisdiction to do that. And all of a sudden they're coming to Congress now, the company's saying, oh no, it's a patchwork of different rules. I guess that's what happens when you resist federal regulation. So hopefully now there's some impetus to get that done. Okay, there you go, federal. Secondly, misinformation. That gets us to Section 230. Warner and Maisie and I laid out, I think, some ideas that are really worth talking about. We already did it with human trafficking. And so looking at some other things that can carved out so the immunity doesn't cover them, real bad stuff. Looking at carving that out while still not limiting innovation and everything else in the freedom of speech that we need to have on the internet. The third piece of it, which I consider the most important but the hardest to do, is antitrust changes. Hardest to do because it even goes beyond tech. This country has always amended our laws and changed our laws and updated them to make them work with the situation we're in. We haven't done that here. I'm up against huge interests that don't want this to happen, huge interests. So I guess what I'm asking your viewers and the people that are watching this today is don't be against everything you see. If you want to see some change, look at some of the proposals I have out there and be willing to make them better, but don't just say, oh, this is going to be a disaster. That's not how our country grew to be what it is today, with a powerhouse with innovation and ideas. We actually had active antitrust enforcement when many of these companies got developed because they were able to find ways to rise up in the marketplace. Right now, that's nearly impossible to do when you have monopolies controlling so many of these sectors.
Great. I think that's all the questions we have time for, and thank you again. And it was fantastic that we were able to have our readers ask you some questions.
Okay,
so I'll go ahead and
do it again. I won't bring a potato next time, though, I promise.
I like the potato. I think that our viewers
will like good. Potato. It's just I have a history of doing this with my online ordering. I actually ordered 5 yogurts that I thought were regular size over the holidays because they were a special pumpkin spice, and I have them. They're still in my freezer, these huge things. So it's really on me. I'm like every consumer. It just shows that if you want to have rules for privacy, people aren't going to read all the fine print. I'm a great example of that.
Oh, good luck with the rest of your online ordering and the rest of your events today.
Okay, see you later.